presidency. Juan?
I'd like to ask you, well, the extraordinary power of Vice President Dick Cheney has been remarked upon quite often, but I don't think it's ever been quite given in such detail of how it developed and accumulated as you have in this book. 9/11 and the days, the actual day of 9/11 and the days afterwards, and Cheney's role in that. You go into that in quite detail. If you could talk about some of the especially unusual aspects of the role that he assumed in those days.
Well, you had the unfortunate coincidence of the president being, as everyone knows, in a schoolroom reading The Pet Goat to elementary school students when the attacks took place. And they have very good communications for the president, but he was still hard to reach and not in the thick of things. And Dick Cheney just took command. He was hustled down to the White House bunker, the PEOC, they call it, Presidential Emergency Operations Center. And one intriguing thing to note from a close look at the records is that if American Flight 77 had in fact been aiming at the White House, which is what the Secret Service thought when they dragged him double speed down to the bunker, he would have lost the race. The plane would have struck the White House before he got to the bunker. Down inside, he was focused very much on sort of the need to direct the cabinet, emergency decision-making. There is no reason to doubt the story that he and President Bush said, that when he gave the famous shoot-down order to say that if there were additional hijacked planes coming towards Washington or anywhere else, that the Air Force had authority to shoot them down. And at the time he gave that order, he believed that there was a plane on the way right now. There's no reasons to doubt that Bush authorized that in advance. It looks as though the vice president made that decision on his own and looked for a blessing afterward. Now, to me, actually, just as a citizen, if the president can't be reached and a plane is considered to be a couple of minutes from Washington and could strike Congress, which happens to sort of be pretty full at the moment, or the Supreme Court, which happens to be hosting a national conference of federal judges at that moment, I'm not sure I'd want him to stand on exact procedure and let the plane come in because the president can't be reached. What's troubling here, and what's kind of a precursor to what comes later, is that the president and vice president did not level with us about the way it happened.
And in the days after 9/11, as the role that he began to assume?
Well, even actually as of that day, he made an interesting decision. You're in the middle of an ongoing emergency. There are so many decisions to make about restarting aviation, which has never been shut down in this country, of reopening the stock markets, what to say to other countries, what steps to take at the borders. And one of the things that Cheney does is he calls for his lawyer, David Addington. Please come back down here into the bunker. We have things to talk about. And as early as the day of 9/11, they were talking together about what new powers the president would require and what legal changes would be required in order to empower the commander-in-chief the way Cheney thought he should be empowered.
Talk about the internal struggle within the Bush administration that almost ended Bush's presidency.
It starts just a few days after 9/11 in one sense, because it turns out that the vice president is truly the father of the warrantless domestic surveillance program. He called in Mike Hayden, who was the head of the National Security Agency, and he said, tell me what you're not doing against al-Qaeda that you could be doing. And Hayden has this sort of famous in Washington briefing device. He draws a Venn diagram with 3 overlapping ovals. One of them is what they'd love to be able to do, one is what they're technically capable of doing, and one is what's legal. And what he says is, you know, where we work is right in the space where those 3 ovals intersect. And Cheney tells him, suppose that 3rd oval wasn't there. Suppose you were not constrained by the law. And he is not saying, let's break the law. He's saying, let's suppose there were no legal restriction. Then what would you do? And he does not go in the direction of asking for a change in the law. He presses the interpretation that as commander-in-chief in wartime, and because intelligence gathering is inherent in war, Bush doesn't have to follow the explicit prohibitions in 2 felony statutes on warrantless surveillance, that Bush as commander-in-chief can simply override those and override them secretly. And so fast forward now, something around a little over 2 years later, December of 2003, the Justice Department starts to become very doubtful that parts of this program are legal. There's a new guy heading the Office of Legal Counsel, which is sort of like the internal Supreme Court of the executive branch. And he says, I just can't back this thing. And it needs to be certified as legal by the Justice Department every 45 days. So there's a deadline coming up in March of '04, March 11th. And for 3 months, Dick Cheney and David Addington are trying to squelch a legal insurgency at Justice, where they're saying with increasing intensity, we can't go along with this.
Well, you indicate also that it's not just a justice, that the Inspector General and the Chief Counsel of the National Security Agency had questions about the program as well, right?
Yeah, I devote 2 whole chapters to this thing. It's the longest narrative in the book because it's unbelievably, there's so much that's new here that we didn't know, and it's an extraordinary drama. The first shot of this little revolution, I guess, is that the General Counsel, Acting General Counsel, and the Inspector General of the National Security Agency, who are essentially the 2 guys charged with making sure it follows the rules, say, well, we're starting to hear some funny questions from Justice. If you're not sure this is legal, we better find out more about it. We want to come in and read the opinions. Now, that alone is an amazing question. It's vanishingly rare to have a major program at an agency and the agency doesn't know what the legal basis is. But they had not been given the opinions. They show up at Justice for a meeting, and David Addington hears about it, Vice President's lawyer. He turns up uninvited, and he tells them to go home. You're not getting the opinions. This is none of your business. And he's a very imposing man, and they left. So 3 months go by, the battle continues, and Dick Cheney does not tell the president for 3 months. The president does not find out that Justice thinks this thing is illegal and won't sign until the day before the deadline.
By the way, this is just a side story, but Cheney has the White House email all blindly going to him, so everyone who writes to each other in the White House, Cheney gets that email.
Early on in the administration, he made arrangements that he and his office would be copied with all the